Welcome to the Church Answers podcast. I'm Thom Rainer. This is Jess Rainer. We talk about a lot of things on here. We talk about things all local church leadership. We talk about Cheney. You just heard the introduction of our favorite accountant, the accounting firm for the church. Over 1,100 churches they serve. We're going to go a different path this time. And Jess, I've got a story.
Okay. You always have a story.
I always have a story. Have you noticed they increase the older I get?
It's really weird because I'm hearing stories that I've never heard before. And the older you get, the more stories you're telling, but stories that you've kept in the vault, and you're for some reason you're letting them out. It's like a good movie that's been locked up in a vault, and then you're releasing it.
Well, I don't guess I really realize that. So I guess that one of your sons hears some of your stories is a pretty good deal. So I got another story.
All right.
Second year at Lifeway, CEO, still trying to learn the business at that point, and kept having different meetings. One of them was with a group that led curriculum publishing. What used to be Sunday school literature, what started back in 1891 with James Marion Frost as Sunday school literature, and it was the staple of Lifeway then, and had been for years and years and years. The only challenge was, and I know you've heard this, upon my arrival, we had experienced a 40-year unit decline. So 40 years in a row, unit decline. Some of it was made up with price increases, and so it didn't always show in the sales, but nevertheless, it was a decline. The good news is, on the other side, we ended up turning that around. A lot of credit to a lot of people, Brad Wagner, Ed Stetzer, particularly Eric Geiger, Earl Roberson, a lot of people on that team that turned that thing around, but it did. But one of the early meetings was we're sitting around, and so I said, I need a competitive analysis of curriculum. Give me a competitive analysis. And, I didn't think about how I should have asked that question, but they gave me a dog and pony show that was incredible. Charts, graphs, all that kind of statistical nerd stuff I like. And it had the major Christian publishers and what curriculum they published and estimated market share and how it differed than ours. And I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, this is not what I wanted. They had put all that work, and it's not what I wanted. And so rather than get mad at them, I said, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. I didn't communicate well. I really wanted a competitive analysis of what may bring our curriculum to lows or highs. And what you have here are other church curriculum publishers. I said, I think some of our bigger threats are going to be from churches that start publishing it themselves rather than other publishing houses, not to mention a few other things that could happen as well as a result. The decline of Sunday school, the fact that self-publishing or church publishing was becoming more and more pervasive. And that was a threat, still is. And although I don't follow the details of Lifeway these days, that's still some of the things that were going on. And one comment from a good guy, probably not the smartest comment to make, but he said, I never would have thought of that. So, oh my goodness, we got a problem. You got to start thinking about that. So this podcast, we're going to talk about why and how you should create your own church curriculum. Mm-hmm. And do you know what inspired this particular podcast?
I don't. I'm still enjoying the story time with Thom Rainer here. So keep going.
You were there when it happened.
Okay, then I don't know what you're going to say. Reading your mind is not one of my spiritual giftings.
I thought you may have picked up on that. That's okay. So we recently had our platinum client meeting in Bradenton, Florida.
Okay,
you were there.
There you're going now. Okay.
Yeah, and you handed out several books that Craft Publishing had done, your self-publishing company.
Right.
And there's one book that many people just kept picking up again and again and again. You remember which one that was?
I guess I wasn't paying attention. Keep going.
That children's book.
Oh, the baptism workbook.
The baptism workbook.
Gotcha.
And it was at that point that I said, wow, this is a guy that has self-published for his church a baptismal workbook that they give to children to work through after they become a Christian. I said, this is ingenious.
Yep.
that's just one example of how churches of all sizes are now self-publishing. Now, you'll have to tell me how old that book is. When did Craft Publishing publish that book?
I think it's within the past year. I'd say it's a year or less old. I could look at exact dates, but yeah, it might have a 2024 copyright date on it.
So, when you started Craft Publishing, you were primarily getting books that, in the traditional sense of the word. A lot of sermon books, probably, and some things like that. But you were getting books. I remember some of them. Oh, I remember some of them that even before it was Craft Publishing. That's another story. But I remember those books, and now I'm seeing something brand new come in. A baptismal guide or a teaching guide for a child after he or she becomes a Christian. Well, that's where I want to go with this podcast.
Self-published by a pastor as a part of his ministry for the church. Yeah, there has been a fundamental shift, and I don't know the timeline of it, maybe the last 10 to 15 years in the publishing world. In fact, I also work with Rainer Publishing. And that company, and I don't know if you remember this, that company started as an ebook company.
I do remember that, thinking that was the future.
That was the future, is that everyone would go to these digital formats, ebooks only. And so Rainer Publishing started as a way for authors to publish specific ebooks. Well, that quickly realized that wasn't the trend. I mean, I think it took a year or two. In fact,
it didn't take that long, if I recall. But anyway, that's your company. You're going to talk about it.
Very quickly, we said, well, let's take some of these ebooks and just put them in print and see what happens. And very quickly, print started outselling ebook. Now, there's still a place for it. There's still a market. It hasn't gone away. But it was the shift. But more importantly, what that emphasis on ebooks did was shift publishing away from the traditional publishers.
Right.
It was what thought was going to be a technology shift, ended up being an industry shift, because it opened up the door for self-publishing. And that has created impacts not only in our culture, but in the church as well. So to highlight your point you're making is that there's a pastor I worked with recently who published a book for parents and kids. It's a workbook that goes through post-salvation, pre-baptism, and goes through that period of why you should get baptized. And it is, and he's written it in a way that any church could pick it up, but he wrote it specifically for his church, and that's something he will use. And so there is a opportunity now that exists for churches to begin to create their own curriculum. And I think this is for a lot of people something that they're not even thinking about. Maybe they don't want to think about, but I think there's a trend here, and I'm seeing it grow. I don't know how fast it's going to grow, but there is a trend that is definitely growing towards churches beginning to create their own curriculum. And these are churches of all sizes. It is not size dependent.
Exactly.
And so that is something that I'm really curious about to watch as the trends go along. And since God has kept me in the publishing world, God continues to keep me in the publishing world. God continues to grow me in the publishing world. And so the fact that I'm going to have a front row seat to this. So yeah, I'm excited to talk about even being what kind of resources are out there. What are we seeing? What's a trend in terms of churches and what they're beginning to publish? What, just off the top of your head, what are some of the things you're beginning to see? And I can talk from my end as well because I have a front row seat to it. But what are you beginning to see as far as what churches are creating for their own resources across the board? What are you seeing?
Well, let's answer the first question, which is What types of curriculum or resources can you create? So that's what we're going to do. We're going to just outline some of those.
That's what I was asking, but
I know, but I'm looking at the exact words, and I wanted to make sure we put them on the lower thirds. You know how we do that. So one other thing I want to talk about, your front row seat. 25 years ago, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Tipping Point, and it took over the world in terms of its concept of how something starts small and becomes a major movement. That's oversimplified. Has a brand new book out, just came out, called Revenge of the Tipping Point. I shouldn't have picked it up this morning because I couldn't put it down. So I read from 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. Revenge of the Tipping Point. Didn't finish the book in 2 hours. It's a nice sized book, but I think you are seeing a tipping point. I think it's been building and building and building. And what is about to happen is a flood of self-publishing in churches that I think is going to be good. So the what type of curriculum you can do? If I were a pastor, I'd do a new member class with that. I mean, that's a no-brainer. Even if I only had 20 new members a year, talk to us about why quantity does not matter. After you pay the base fee, you have to go put all your books in a warehouse and have them distributed and all that, right?
Right. Yeah.
No,
No,
wrong,
you don't.
wrong.
No, you don't. What has happened in particular with some of the larger companies out there, one in particular, Amazon and some others as well, they take the major part of actually printing and distributing and shipping the book out of the hands of the self-publisher. And so that basically, and everything, a lot of things now are print on demand. And so what it means as a church is you can create a resource, and when you need to order more, you just go directly to the printer, if you will, and order it from them, and at a very deep discount compared to what is typically, retail price is what someone would buy it, off the internet. Or
they have
other
an author
places.
price, if you will.
Yeah. And so what's happening is now it's so much easier and accessible, and it's so fast too. Like if you need your books, you can get it in a week if you need to, or less. And so what's happening is that the ease of having these books. And so you talk about a new member class, you may teach that class. I think we did a podcast on this recently. You may teach this class 4 times a year, but you don't want to sit there and have 100 books, sitting around.
Right.
Every time you need to get ready for this class, you put an order in. Maybe you need 5 books, maybe you need 10 books, and it's available. And so the ease of it, not only has the accessibility, but the ease of it has drastically increased. And so if we're looking at what types of curriculum or resource you can create, a new member class is an easy one. It probably is one that you already have in some format.
Right.
Maybe it's a binder, maybe it's a PDF. The reality is, over time, people don't keep those.
Give them a book.
Give them a book. Give them something that fits on their shelf, something that's branded. It's people hate keeping binders. They're big, they're bulky. You can create different book sizes, and so that new member class. Why are churches creating this one? Because the content's already written.
Yep.
Most people have already taken the time. Pastors in particular are going to take the time to put this resource together. What they're doing, and this is what I'm beginning to see, is they're creating their own church library, and they start with the new members class, the information, and put it in a book form, make it a workbook, do different things with it. It becomes your own curriculum. And people think, well, what if I change some things? That's the beauty of this, of self-publishing. You can go and actually update it yourself. Exactly. As you go along, and so upload a new file, get it updated. You can constantly be growing your church library with that. So new member class, that's an easy one. What else? What have you seen about what types of curriculum?
Well, we talked about the preparing for baptism, children's baptism. So I would add to that child dedication. We have it at the church at Spring Hill, child dedication. You may have something for raising your child in the way of the Lord, something like that. Or some denominations call it confirmation. They're different names, but something for children. There those there. Then we get to the one of Bible studies. This might be the tough one. If you are trying to compete with a major church curriculum writer in the sense that they do it, that could be challenging. But there are a lot of other ways to do it as well. You could have a book, Jess, where they actually fill in the book of the Bible that you're teaching, and it has a series of questions for that. And you just hand it out, and you can change it up for every time you go through a book of the Bible, and let your preaching become the curriculum as well.
Yeah, I am. This is probably beyond specific child resources, parenting resources. Actually, this is probably the second one I'm seeing growing in terms of what churches, and it's surprising because I think most people feel like it's the biggest one to create. And so there are a lot of churches out there, and I would say, looking at it probably is on the larger size of churches that are doing this, because it does take a lot. there's a capacity issue of whoever's writing it, if it's a pastor or a church leader, it takes some capacity issue. But this is the one that I'm seeing become the fastest, are these Bible studies for small groups or Sunday school, whatever model
Mm-hmm.
you have. I will say, and so there are some pastors that they're using this for a long season, 6 months, 8 months, even the whole year. And so they're basically creating their small group curriculum in one book, literally
Yes.
in one book, for a long period of time. And so it's not something they're having to recreate over and over every quarter. They're using it for a long season. It's a growing trend. I think it's a great trend because it's very specific. So for a lot of pastors, though, I think the easiest way to create this one is based off your sermons.
Mm-hmm.
It's easier. I will say that it's easier to take the material you're already writing and to create it and make it into curriculum. That I say that is more of a reactive approach. What I'm starting to see now that pastors are becoming aware that they can do this is they're actually beginning to write. If they write their sermons, I write typically in an outline manuscript, and I know several pastors do that. They're taking, as they're preparing their sermons, and going ahead and making it as if they were going to be writing a book, writing a curriculum out. And so it's a
Oh,
lot
wow.
harder to take reactive and go back and make it work, but they're putting things in there that is natural for it to go into publication. So that's the big one I'm seeing, a growing trend right now.
Think about this. First of all, you're putting a book in the hands of your members
Mm-hmm.
that they're going to keep on your sermon, and you can hand them out to guests too. They're not that
Right.
expensive. So you
Right.
start, hey, welcome. This is what our pastor's preaching on. He's going to be on pages 34 to 38, and this will help you follow along.
Yep. The books are actually cheaper than a coffee mug.
Wow.
That's if you're thinking like, yeah, I know. Listen, I know the cost that we pay for coffee mugs at our church. We hand out every first time guest gets a coffee mug. Printing a book would be cheaper than a coffee mug, as far as
With
price.
this caveat, you do pay an upfront price one time to get it done.
Correct.
So
Yes. If
after
you're
that one time price, it's really cheap per copy. And
correct.
again, I'm not going to give the one time price. They can check with you on your pricing at craftbookpublishing.com. Is that it?
That's it. Mm-hmm.
All right,
Yep.
Craft Book. We got it in the show notes, but they can check pricing there. But after that, it's really inexpensive. I wrote a book. It's still being used in a lot of churches, and it's called "We Want You Here." And I think our
Mm-hmm.
church has used it some. You
It's
can
in every
do
welcome bag for first time guests.
your own "We Want You Here" type of
Mm-hmm.
book for guests. And
Right.
you can make it short, and you can tell about your church, and you talk about how much you're glad they're here. There's another one.
Mm-hmm.
And you can put about your church, and you can just hand it out. And again, becomes something that those guests will keep. And by the way, you have already mentioned that this is small churches as well as medium, as well as large churches. But if you hand out something like that about your church, you're going to be in the minority of churches that do it. In other words, you're going to be unique in a good way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Even as if I'm thinking I'm a small church pastor, normative size church pastor, however you want to describe it, I'm thinking, okay, what content do I already have that exists in my church? Well, I have a new members class. Well, I definitely have a statement of faith. I definitely have a governance, have some bylaws, have some constitution. I have my new members class material. And basically, when you look at the totality of all the information that you have in all these different places, what you can begin to do as a pastor is put them all together in one, and
Yeah.
and create this one time. And again, you can update as you go along, but create a one time resource that has all that information in book form. So take all those binders, take all those printings, all the things you have to do, punch holes, and put it all together. You create this one time resource that becomes evergreen for your church, and create everything in one book. And so now when you hand it out, and we have called a starting point class. We talk about our 30,000 foot view of the church. We talk about our vision statement, our mission statement, and basically you've now created your church's book, everything
Yeah.
about blank church. You can include things like "We Want You Here." Even the very beginning of it could be talking about first time guests. So
Yeah.
look at the totality of all the things that your church has in written form, and look at the possibility of bringing it together all in one resource. And it becomes a resource that people will keep versus all
I,
these binders.
I love it. If I could only
Yeah.
become a pastor again, I can't. I'd be fired. We've
Yeah.
talked about a child becoming a Christian, so
Mhm.
something about that. So we could put that in the list. Sermon
Real,
series.
real
Yeah, go
quickly
on.
on becoming a Christian. I just had a conversation recently with a pastor in Kentucky, and he, for lack of better words, wrote. I don't want to call it a tract. That seems not what he did, but he wrote a resource that just typed about for his context of what it means to follow Jesus.
Hmm.
Um, and it has received a tremendous response to not only his church and his community, but other churches. And it's
Wow.
short. I think it's around maybe 7 or 8,000 words,
That's.
and so
Did
it's
you publish
short.
it?
Uh, I'm hoping
Oh,
if it works out. I love the resource, and I'm excited about wherever God takes it for him. And if it happens to work out with me, great. But it's something that needs to be published, and that's what I told him. I said, You've got to publish this one way or the other. I don't care if it's me or someone else. Get this out there." Um, and it's taken off, and it's a simple evangelism tool that he's using that they're actually seeing people come to Christ because of it. And
wow.
so again, it doesn't have to be long, it doesn't have to be extensive, but he wanted something that he could hand out, and he just got tired of tired, maybe a strong word, but he wanted to create something more than it was just some 8.5 by 11 pieces of paper printed off. He
Right.
wanted something that felt a little bit more, something that people would actually hold on to, and things that people are willing to give out. And so think
Oh,
of it as you can create an outreach tool for your church. Very simple. Again, and so he's asking the question, how can I self-publish this for my church as an effective evangelism tool?
wow. Well, you're gonna have to tell me more about that one because I really hope that you end up publishing it. Kraft ends up publishing it because I'd like to get that out there.
Yeah,
Or
we'll
Rayner
see.
Publishing. The difference between Kraft and Rayner Publishing, Kraft is self-publishing, which we're talking about mainly, and you have a select few authors that come in for royalty-based publishing, which would be Rayner Publishing. Am I
Correct.
saying that
Correct.
right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. What else we have? Sermon series. We've already talked about that. Say you preach a sermon for a book of the Bible for 6 months, 26 weeks. You could have 26 chapters and it'd be a nice sized book, 4 or
Hmm.
5 pages per chapter. You just go through the same outline again and again, but make it different for those particular verses, publish it, and you have 6 months worth. I guarantee you your church members are going to keep it
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
retain it.
I know for me, when I write a sermon, um, I typically write close to 3,000 words. So for those pastors out there who write manuscripts, I don't know what your word count is. Your average book size that you write is how many words?
Little books around 18,000. The bigger books around 40,000. And that's still a small book, my 40,000 book.
Okay. So call it 20,000 words.
It's like 7
Um,
sermons.
in 7 weeks, you've written a book.
Yeah.
And so again, the shift, I believe, has to come when you're actually writing the sermon series versus, being more proactive versus reactive. But most pastors, even in their word count when they speak, even if it might be a little bit more than that, if there's transcripting services out there. There's things you can do that you create enough content as a pastor to write 3 or 4 books per year when you really think about it,
It's
if
amazing.
not more.
And your congregation will love it. We have talked about your church and putting things about your church for new members class, for the discovery class, or anything like that. You could have a full book on the mission and the vision of the church. One of your more frequent users of Craft Publishing has said he's thinking about doing that.
Hmm.
Just,
Yeah,
hey, this is our mission, this is our vision, and this is why. And coming up with a 15,000 word book.
yeah. That has been one. I have. There's a pastor I've worked with, a church I've worked with that's done several books, and they're as I mentioned, creating their own library. And one of the things he's done is a discipleship tool. I don't know if we've actually included that in here as the different parts, but
It
a
could be.
huge part of their mission and vision is discipleship. And so it's really cool. It's called Letters from Your Pastor, and he's creating multiple resources as he's writing along and basically helping people grow in their faith. And it says these ongoing resources. I even had one church create a 365-day Bible reading plan and a devotional. And it's
Ooh,
not as difficult as you think. It's
no.
not. And so they have their own in-house yearly Bible reading plan that all they have to do is at the beginning of the year, order a new batch at extremely discounted, and they're off and running. It's really remarkable. Like when you think about it, it's not as difficult to create the content in order to get published for your church as you realize.
All right, let's shift gears. We've talked about what you can create. Now let's talk about why you should create it. And before we do that, let me just say a word about, guess who? Cheney and Associates. Cheney and Associates is our sponsor. They pay the bills. They're the best accounting firm for the church. That's all they do is church accounting. They serve over 1,100 churches. And I got to tell you, it's top notch. So hear from me. Don't mess around with accounting in your church. Outsource it to an organization like Cheney and Associates. That's CheneyAssociates.com, or you can see it in the show notes. All right, why? Why should you create your own resource? You know, one of the first things that pastors want to know is, okay, is this biblically aligned, doctrinally aligned with what we believe? Even if it's a nuanced difference. I mean, there's some churches that wouldn't want to write anything about immersion baptism. There's some churches that's all they want to write about. And they're both orthodox. They're both, I mean, biblical believing in the sense of orthodoxy. And so they want to make sure that it is aligned. So, you know, whatever you do, it's going to be doctrinally aligned.
Yep. I think one of the trends, I know we heard from Ryan Burge recently, is just the rise of non-denominational churches. Absolutely growing. And so we're seeing more and more non-denominational churches. Well, what happens when you become a non-denominational church? You no longer have the denominational resources that were available before. And these larger, even mid-size, even some smaller denominations are often tasked with printing the denominational content. And so a lot of churches have lost their, for lack of better words, their voice from a denominational standpoint. Maybe that's too strong of a word, but they've lost their ability to mass produce, however you want to describe it. You get the point I'm making there.
Yeah.
Is that they don't have that resource available to them anymore. And so what's happening is a lot of these churches are producing their own doctrinal and theological works. I know recently I read a book that I was thinking about using in my church, going church wide, and I was loving it. And I got down to one part towards the end of the book, and it was a deal breaker for me. That one thing. I'm talking one page out of like 200 pages. And I was so frustrated because I was like, oh, this is what I don't have to create. It's ready to go out of the box. But it was a deal breaker. That one thing.
And it was doctrinal.
And so that was, honestly, that spurred a conversation with me and some people in my church. It's like, we have to create our own discipleship curriculum. We really do. We have searched and searched and searched, and we want something that has doctrinal integrity, want something that matches our doctrinal statement, that has that clarity. And so we decided we're going to eventually, hopefully sometime next year, we're going to collaborate and put our minds together. I have some bright minds in my church. And then when you show up, it goes down a little bit. But when you're not there,
and then your mom shows up and it goes back up.
Right. But when you're not there, there's definitely a higher intellectual capacity. And so I'm going to be pulling some people together to create our own discipleship curriculum, our one-on-one, one-on-two, one-on-few discipleship curriculum. And so what's happening is churches seeing the non-denominational rise. We're even seeing churches within the denominations that they're in have theological nuances, to where it's like they're okay to teach that, but then it requires a teaching after that. So they'll explain it, and then they have to re-explain it in a different way. And so a lot of churches are like, let's just create our own. And so a big reason of why you create your own resource is because it aligns doctrinally. You don't have to re-explain things. You don't have to post-explain things. It goes right in line with what you're wanting to do. To me, that's probably the biggest one for me and what I'm seeing. What else are you seeing though?
Well, I want to go back to the doctrinal one, then I'll come back and answer your question. I'm thinking of a large denomination that has a very clear historical statement of faith. But I can tell you this, many pastors in that denomination will say, well, here's what our denomination believes, but this part over here, we're not really there. And if I started saying which parts, then I would talk about the denomination, which I don't want to do. So that's another reason. You publish your own. we've talked about doctrine, we talked about new member, we talked about all these kind, and now we're doing the why, provide doctrinal integrity. But we've said this, demonstrate how your church is unique. Everything we've said is the unique angle for your church. This one is a good possibility, especially if you're doing curriculum that you're buying every week, cost savings. You don't do it for the money, but boy, can you really, I know how much the stuff costs to have weekly literature or something sent to you. I used to run a company that sent that, and costs kept coming up on our part. And so we had to pass on that cost to the churches. Cost savings. I mean, goodness gracious. You look at these books and how inexpensive they are, especially if you buy it at the author rate, which you become as the church. The church becomes the author.
Right. Yeah, it is. And as we mentioned, with self-publishing, particularly with craft book publishing, there's a one-time upfront fee. But beyond that, you only have to pay the print cost of the book, which is drastically lower than what they call the retail costs, or what you would buy it from a retailer. And so there's an upfront investment that has a long-term cost savings.
And so, overall, that upfront investment for you, again, I'm not going to get into the dollars because things could change over time, but that upfront investment that goes to craft is really small for what you get. Right. Say that.
Yeah. My whole goal is to help churches, and anytime I'm able to do that, that's my goal. Help pastors, help church leaders. But the long-term cost savings, if you're creating these ongoing, think about it. If you created 3 years worth, you did 1 year at a time. And you created your small group curriculum, and you got to the point you did it 4 years in a row. And I know you don't want to always go back to the same thing. I get it, but I'm trying to illustrate a point. Is then you go back your 4th year and redo it, or go through the same thing you've already created.
Either go through the same thing or tweak it.
Yeah,
and I can guarantee you, your people are not going to remember what they did 3 years ago or 4 years ago.
Yeah, even go 5 years. Go if your church invested 5 years where you're creating these for your churches, and maybe whatever cycle your church is on, you may do 1 year you're going to emphasize biblical doctrine, next year you're going to emphasize evangelism, and you create your discipleship or your small group curriculum based off those things. Then you can recycle them, and in 3, 4, 5 years time, you've created a library that you can use over and over again, that now you don't have any cost except very minimal, which is the print cost of the book. It can have a dramatic cost savings for you as a church in the long term. It really can.
No storage of books too. Just another reminder.
Yeah.
Whenever you want the books, you punch a button and they come to you.
Yeah. And all this is available now. Which again, most churches have no idea this is even available to them anymore. That it's not. They're learning it is available for the first time, and so that's something you begin to think about. Oh, okay, we can do this, and let's plan it out next year. Even as I don't know exactly when this podcast comes out, it'll be towards the end of the year,
November 7th, 2024.
So even if you have time, put it in your budget for next year. The one-time cost. Create your first one, get it going. That's often the first step, is just do the first one, and you'll see how easy it is to continue and how much cost savings you do have.
And build the library. So we got what can you create, why you should create it. Now let's answer the how question. How do I begin? Well, first of all, you got to decide which one of these ideas we talked about are you going to do? Which one are you going to test? And you may have another idea other than what we said. But you got to I begin with one just to get the experience if they've never done it before, because they'll come back again and again.
I would recommend, if someone was starting off, I would recommend a workbook of sorts.
Okay.
Well, what kind of workbook? I don't know. Maybe it's a salvation for kids workbook, salvation and baptism together in one. Maybe it's your new members class that you're doing a workbook. It's easier to write. It really is. It's not much of, you don't have to worry about the continuity as much. You can do more sexual material. It feels less daunting when you're creating a workbook. And two, you'll see when you create a workbook how much whoever's using it is going to hold on to it. It has anytime they fill in the blank kind of mindset, even if you're creating a discipleship curriculum, whatever it is, make it a workbook form at first. Give that one a shot. And I think you'll see the effectiveness right away. What are your thoughts though? What would be your first go if you were a pastor and you're creating your own resource? What would you do first? I know it's not fair
You,
how you write books. You're an anomaly the way you write books, but put yourself in my position as someone who's normal. What would you do?
you should be able to guess that. I'd do a new members class. So
Okay.
I do the new members class. And what I would do is I'd have a workbook that is unique to my church. And right next to it, I have this little book called I Am a Church Member. And I'd just say, here's what we're going to do for our new members class. Because I created I Am a Church Member to sell for about $5 if I saw it recently on Amazon and that includes shipping costs. So yeah, I'm pushing my own book there. I get it. But the thing about it is I would do a new members class. I mean, this is the guy that wrote High Expectations. This is the guy that wrote I Am a Church Member, I Will. This is the guy that wrote, what's my most recent book?
Where have all the church members gone?
Where have all the church members gone? So, and it talks about church membership and all that. So that's what I'd write.
Yeah. I'm even thinking one more as you were talking.
What?
This would be super easy to create a sermon journal for your church. Brand it, put your name on it, hand it out at the beginning of the year, and even put just a daily devotion, like a daily verse in there. You can pick out your teams, who are your staff, your church's favorite 365 verses, with the 52-week sermon journal in there. You can talk about the effectiveness of that and how much people could just begin to write their sermons and their thoughts. Places for daily. So you're not creating content as much, very little content. You're just creating space for people to write. Think more journal.
I like it.
That could be a really easy one to get started.
Yeah. Hey, before I forget it, I want to advertise something. Okay. We'll put it in the show notes. We have a relatively new pastor's journal. Yeah. My life as a pastor. It's blank. And for those of you who've been in ministry 10 or more years, or maybe even you're at the end of the vocational part of it and you want to write, this was my first sermon, this is my first conflict, this is my first baptism, whatever. We'll put that in the show notes, but it's your story as a pastor. It's a journal, and just write it out and give it to your family members. Your brother gave me one to write as a father.
Okay.
And I got about 3 pages done 2 years ago.
I don't remember seeing that one, but it's a good idea.
Yeah. He wanted me to write it for his kids.
Okay.
Not only him, but for his kids. Okay. Right. So test one of the options. You'll need to determine who's going to write it. Maybe it's the pastor. Maybe you got someone else in your church.
I think this is the biggest obstacle. When people are thinking about creating their own curriculum, this is the one that's like, I don't have time to write.
Right.
I don't. All right. So I'm asking a similar question that I just asked you. If you're in my shoes and you were not going to write it, let's take you out of the equation. Mm-hmm. And you want to create a resource for your church. Let's do the new members class. How would you do it?
I would go to someone in my church that I know is articulate and probably would be so in writing as well. Maybe a school teacher, if I have somebody that has had some seminary training, maybe that, someone that's been to Bible college, maybe a physician that would type and not write so we could understand what he or she is putting down. I would go to a person that I think could probably do it and has that type of skill set.
Yeah. Give them some guidelines, give them an outline. There'd have to be some pre-work done with it. Even taking your existing content and organizing it, but then having someone actually go put it. And I'm going to go back to a workbook form, having them go through and put it in a workbook form. There's a way. I think if you're listening to this, if you're a church leader and you're thinking, I don't have time to do that. If very minimal work, few hours to get something set up, and you go find one person in your church, and then it becomes a back and forth. You redline it, send it back, let them correct it. Take your time, take a couple months, get it going.
And that person then becomes your writer, editor for future stuff too. Mm-hmm. I like it.
Yep.
For PDFs, I like book publishing better, but if you're going to use a PDF or similar format, get it designed well. Find a designer so it doesn't look sloppy.
Yeah, and that is a good point. Not everything has to be a book. And again, when we're saying book, I don't want you to think traditional book. You can create workbooks, different sizes, all different sizes that you can create. Small, large, ton of different sizes. But there are some times you just need a PDF. 2 or 3 pages. Sometimes you need something that's a booklet form. And I get it. There are places for that. We have a booklet that we use for first time guests, and it fits, right? We give them a book and we give them a booklet. We give them both because one, it's yours, so I can't really go and publish your book. But
Which
so
one?
we want you here. We give
Okay.
guests that. And then we give a booklet for our church. So we kind of merge two resources together that really fit for us. So there are different things. Everything doesn't have to be a book. And so sometimes PDF, similar formats, just do it well.
And
Just do it
you
well.
know, at first thought I'm saying go get a designer, but you can actually get an AI program now that's you can buy for $20 and it designs these things and you just a one-time fee. And I've used it a lot.
I'm not in that world. I can't speak to that. Yeah, I'm sure it is. I'm still a big proponent. There are some like 99 designs out there. Fiverr, they're
Oh,
great places.
there's some very inexpensive designers, and I'm not trying to take designers out of business. It's just, you know me, I play with AI. Well, I'll do a lot more and play with AI. It's been writing my strategies for me.
I know. I have a good team, and I want to keep giving them business.
There you do. So, and then we go back to where we started. Contact a self-publisher to do books. Uh, I know it's promoting you, but I don't know anybody who provides what you do. You're really a guided self-publisher
Mhm.
because you tell them what they need to know. You walk alongside them. You say, "Hey, do this, do that," and you know the church, and you're a believer, and
Mhm.
so it's that's why I like sending people to you because I make them happy when I send them to Craft Book Publishing.
Yeah. It is, and I mentioned this earlier in the podcast. God has continued to keep me in self-publishing, in the publishing world, not just self-publishing, in the publishing world. And I just say, all right, God, I hold it very loosely. And it is amazing that the people I get to talk with, the church leaders that are out there, and some of the resources they're wanting to create, and they're wanting the content for themselves. Because when you self-publish, you keep the rights, you keep the royalties, you keep, you're in charge of determining the distribution of it. You get all of that, and a lot of pastors are going, I want it for my church.
Hmm.
I don't want it to go through a more traditional publisher. And so there's a place, and I'm very grateful that God has connected me with these church leaders, because they've put some amazing, not all church leaders. There's some parachurch ministries that I work with. There are actually some just individuals that they just want to tell their story. I've had a couple moms that have had some hard things go through life, and they wanted to share their story. And so it's been a joy just to be able to work with those individuals and those churches and those pastors. And so yeah, that's my heart, is to grow God's kingdom in that way. And so if I get the opportunity to work with individuals, churches, it's a joy. It's an honor.
You know, Jess, we prepare these podcasts in broad outline form. You know, we have points that we're going to cover. I never know exactly how it's going to pan out because we don't know what each other's going to say till we start saying it in the podcast and recording it. And this particular podcast just got me fired up again about what it can do for the local church. This is
Hmm.
just, it truly is a tipping point for the local church to create their own resources, their own curriculum, their own books. I like it. Once again, you can go to craftpublishing.com. Look at that in the show notes at CRAFT publishing, craftbookpublishing.com. Make sure I say that right. Craftbookpublishing.com. And you can see it in the show notes. Any closing word, Jess, before we wrap this one up?
No, I'm going back to where we started. This is, to me, is a really cool trend, where it started off as a technological shift, has turned into an industry shift that I think is going to be turning into a ministry shift, as more and more churches, or even some churches that are beginning to work together to create resources. I don't think that's out of the realm of possibility of partnering with 2, 3, 4 churches, maybe 3 or 4 pastors that that y'all are all like-minded and you want to create this resource and you do it together for your individual churches. I'm beginning to see some of that as well. It's taking the load off.
Our
Um,
denominational leaders, in some it would be a district or association or a conference, you
yep.
know, at that level, help your churches to do
Yeah.
these things.
There's a shift that's happening, and it's putting back the emphasis on that doctrinal and theological and biblical integrity that a lot of churches really want to take hold of. And so I'm excited about that. I really am. And
Doctrinal, biblical, theological, and also contextual. Every church is in a different context, so you
yeah,
do it in your own context.
yeah, which goes back to that pastor in Kentucky. That's specifically what he's doing. So I'm excited about that. That's my closing thought is if God's leading in this direction, and that's been a heart, if you've kind of felt that burden, that little bit of like, oh, I want that. Maybe God's leading you to create that. And along the way, if you need some help, I'm out there. I'm excited to be able to do that.
All right. You have been listening to the Church Answers podcast with Jess Rayner and Thom Rayner. We've been talking about churches really beginning to publish their own material. It is a trend. It is a tipping point. We'll probably have more on that later. But as always, thank you, Cheney and Associates, for being a sponsor. Thank you, listeners. Hey, you YouTubers, give us a like, give us a thumbs up, give us a rating, give us something to just let the world know. Share this podcast. We really want to get more on YouTube as much as possible, not because of the faces, just because it's a good place where a lot of communication is taking place. And for those of you who faithfully continue to be on the podcasting app, thank you. Give us a rating and review as well. As always, thank you for being a part of the Church Answers podcast. We'll see you next week.